Welcome back to the Carrot and Stick podcast, a podcast series where we go through all things sales performance management and motivation to understand what makes our wonderful industry of recruitment tick. My name's Derry, and today I'm sitting down with Spencer, the head of sales ops and L&D over at Discover International. It may be head of L&D and sales ops, not head of sales ops and L&D. I probably got it the wrong way around. I'm sure he'll forgive me. We have a really good conversation today, going through some topics that we haven't really had on the podcast before, as you'd expect from an L&D professional. We go through why he doesn't think L&D should fall under HR, especially in a recruitment organization. Instead, it should sit much closer to ops. We talk through embracing metrics and not looking at them too negatively. And then finally, something that I found really interesting, we talked through change management and how you handle that in a growing company. We're at 40 heads here at OneUp. It's always interesting to hear perspectives on how we should manage these things and over-communicate them to the point that they get heard by all people across an organization. It's a really fascinating chat. I'm sure you'll absolutely love it. He does not tell me, though, whether or not the wine bottles behind him are full or empty. You'll have to try and figure that one out for yourself. Without further ado, let's get into it. Spencer over at Discover International. Lovely. So, Spencer, thank you very much for jumping on. Really appreciate you giving me some time today to have a talk. We were just talking back and forth a second ago. You are calling in from Miami. How's the weather over there? Because it is very miserable over here right now.
We're in a little scattered storms, but pretty much blue skies and a lot of heat.
That's always the blessing of being in a nice sunny place like that. Over here, it's grey skies, misery, rain, all the rest of it. So I'm jealous. But here we are. So I was opening up this way. Let's open the floor to you for 2 minutes. Tell us about you, your role, where you work in your career today. Just give us a quick 2-minute intro to Spencer.
Okay. So Spencer Lyon, the head of L&D and Sales Operations. Very awkward title, but it kind of goes to my background and what I actually do for the organization, how I partner with yourself and different vendors and things like that to bring value to the organization. I have about 10 years in staffing. Started off on production. I was a finance and accounting guy. Full desk running perm contracts. Moved into building out my last company's TA group. Helped them expand across the country. Opened up like 3 or 4 different offices and expanded those offices. Helped them survive COVID by digitalizing them. Helping them with the remote aspect. And that was actually our best revenue year ever. We went from 40 million in revenue to about 70 million in revenue with 150 million revenue expected the following year. Mostly because of some of the things that I did partnering with the VPs of ops. At the time, I was the director of L&D over there, but did a lot of the leg work for them, and we really just drove it home. So I'm very proud of that one. Then joined Discover. We're a life science headhunting company focusing on pharmaceutical and biotech all across the country. We started in London. They migrated over here to the U.S. Operations in Poland, London, Miami, and then states in the U.S. and then Mexico, and soon to be Canada.
Excellent. Whereabouts in Canada? I'm curious.
Toronto, I think.
Excellent. Vancouver and Toronto are 2 places on my hit list of places I've got to see. I want to go and try and see them in November this year when I'm over there, but time will tell on that from there. Travel conversations could be a whole thing.
The only place I've ever been. Montreal is amazing.
I've been to Montreal 3 times, which is why I'm now desperate to go and see everywhere else.
Good on you.
Amazing. You know what I love as well? One small thing to note here. I find it really interesting speaking to folks from the US because you guys will say staffing. Over here, we say recruitment, right?
Sure.
Do you have to deal with that in the business as well, given you guys are global? Do some say recruitment and some say staffing?
Yeah, definitely. I actually started really preferring headhunting. It is funny. There's so many terms in our world, from what the internal, like our clients and their internal conversations, to our candidates and what they envision we do, to then our own internal conversation. And so it's just like, you just got to be really nimble on it, not really take it personally, and take the time to explain how you bring value.
Yeah, completely that. I mean, I've heard talent solutions, obviously consulting is a big one as well. There's so many terms out there. Yeah, exactly. Complete talent augmentation. That's the fanciest one, isn't it? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Awesome. Well, the beauty is because you're in quite a large company here as well, and because of your role, your experience over the last 10 years, I've got some really unique topics that you put forward, which I think are really cool ones. First one, that you don't think L&D should fall under HR, especially in recruitment. I love that one. Second one, embracing metrics and not looking at them negatively. A big one, given the name of this podcast, Carrot and Stick, it kind of lines up well. And the third one, I joked that actually it's quite handy for us as a business, and I'm really looking forward to getting into this, is change management. Still all sound good to you? Should we start at the top?
Let's go.
Awesome. So you don't think L&D should fall under HR. You gave me a little bit of a 30-second spiel before we went live about why you believe this. You're in the role. Tell me why you don't think L&D should sit under HR.
couple of reasons. As I researched and studied and connected with a lot of L&D people who seemed like they were hurting. They were limited to what they can actually provide, and they always were looked at as a nice to have, not a need to have. Right? It was like, when we're doing good, we'll have a nice robust L&D group, but if we do bad, we're gonna cut those guys, and we're gonna just drive our people. And to me, that doesn't seem right. I do see L&D kind of maybe straddling the line around, like, let's say, compliance things that needs to drive into HR. But I shouldn't be having as many meetings with an HR person as I should with the ops people, because the ops people are on the floor in the trenches out there potentially battling with front office teams. And so they have a much better perspective of what might be needed. I connected with another individual who gave me an amazing term called ready relevant training. And so what that means is along the lines of identify pain points early and design a program that is specific to whatever little chink in the chain there is. Don't focus. I mean, the courses are good. Having people automate that, it's fine. But when it comes to like pivoting, driving a certain like increase in revenue or getting new logos or whatever the incentive may be, L&D people can play a huge part in that. And if they're siloed away from ops and they're kind of getting it through like the telephone game, it gets convoluted, and I don't think results are achieved as fast as you possibly can.
Really interesting. And as you said it at the very start, I thought about this. Like in the SaaS industry, we have like L&D, and I've never thought about it this way before. But it's L&D that sits under sales, and we call it sales enablement, right? It's about the producing of content, it's the training, the upskilling of new products, things like that. Whereas you don't really hear it called that at all in the recruitment and staffing industry. It more just comes down to it is L&D, and everyone always thinks L&D, oh, that's that training department, right? That train people up and then set them loose in front of a manager.
No, that's exactly it. There's a little bit of differential features. I mean, there's some pretty big ones, I guess, with SaaS versus like a service industry, right? But it's the enablement part is powerful. There's so many, like we were talking about, different vernacular in our worlds and staffing. And same thing for like my title. Like most people know I bring a lot of value, but they're not fully sure everything that I do for the organization.
And that's why I guess you got that tie of the titles almost where it's like sales ops, which they'll go, oh yeah, I get that with L&D, and they're like, huh, how does that work together? And that's when you then have that chance to say, well, here's how those two things slot so well together, right? So,
correct.
So why do you think it should be under ops then more specifically? Is it because it's closer to the end product, to the recruitment consultants themselves?
100%. The thing is, I'm not an IT person, but I dance well with them, and I'm like very fond of data, using the metrics, using the systems that the organizations are investing heavily in to be able to get a clear picture on the activities and the efforts that people are doing, and drive that, right? And identify where you can then hone in on making improvements, right? You have this one saying too that I call ABC. It's like this Glenn Ross saying that I've pivoted. Old school movie for anybody who doesn't know what that is.
Anyone in sales in the UK knows exactly about it. Yeah, 100%.
So ABC, right? Always be closing, right? I say no. I say always be curious, right? And if you're curious, not only about your clients, your candidates, but about your own process, then you'll take the time to reflect, acknowledge let's say the trough that you're in, and then excel up to the peaks that you want to get to, by using something that guides you through, let's say, a dark tunnel. I've talked to a lot of different people, a lot of different L&D professionals, a lot of HR professionals, a lot of staffing professionals, and it seems consistent where it's like, yeah, L&D does a great job, but we don't know how to prove results. We don't know how to do this. We don't know how to do that. And it's like, come on, like it's not crazy complicated, but it does take an investment of time with anything that you're trying to implement. And with that, it's just about having all that communication, all that driven, and everybody aligned along the way to make sure like, okay, let's move it there. So yeah, it's interesting kind of space, I've put myself in. It helps drive a lot of value.
Well, let's dig into it more, to be fair, because I imagine, we have a lot of clients, when I think about it, that are between, say, 10 and 30 in heads. They're just about getting like a finance function being spun up, for example. Things are being taken off the MD and being doled out, essentially. And for many, I think about the clients that I've spoken to that have got an L&D function, there's probably less than 10%. Yes, we've got a lot smaller clients, but even the bigger ones, some of them don't have an L&D function. And for those
Right.
that I've spoken to, they say, look, there's maybe two things we look at here. It's ramp time for our new hires and it's continued success after 12 months. Are they still hitting their number right? And when I've spoken to people that work in L&D about this, they're like, oh no, there's so much more to it than that. How
Yeah.
would you define what you believe your measures are and your kind of level of your measure of success or what the business holds you to? How do they measure what
Yeah.
you're doing?
So, I built it in a unique way. So when I joined this company, me and the CEO sat down and kind of developed something that would help us and had a really good understanding of how we want to move forward. So you're right. Most people design onboarding programs, upskilling programs, compliance programs, leadership programs, and maybe a few other ones there. But those are your like automated journeys standard. Um,
Got it.
what I do here is, I've built all those things for, let's say, um, have it in the pipeline. But the more unique thing is when I get to kind of dive into the data and then build unique training programs for people that then help them improve on what we've identified using the information that we're getting to really hone in on the little chink in the chain, right? The little notch that's like maybe like help, like they keep running into the wall. They don't realize there's a ladder right there to the right of them, right? And again, staffing is crazy. I know staff can be wild too, but it's up and down, it's left and right, it's purple and black. Like it's just it can be very hectic in the day. So if my main objective is making people more organized, so that way when we look at the data, we can drive where we can make improvements, learning opportunities to really accelerate what we're trying to achieve as an organization.
Got it. Love it. And so then what does your team look like? Is it just you in the role in this case? And remind me again, how big is Discover today?
Discover is a little less than 100 heads right now.
Okay.
Um,
And is it just you and the team,
and
or are there multiple people that you manage who then deliver these L&D programs?
yeah, so I have an L&D manager under me, and as well as an operations manager under me.
Got it.
That way, I don't necessarily dilute their workloads with the different aspects of it, but then can still bring them together when I need to drive certain things.
Got it. You're that kind of conduit that sits in the middle then, right? And
Exactly.
when you look back at, say, the last 2 years then, what are you most proud of? What's the thing that you've done across Discover that you think is like, yeah, that is the real defining impact that I'm having here?
It's a good question. We had a quarterly review, and I'm going to use what I said in that recently. It has to be what we call our client development plan. There's a leadership program that I'm trying to develop right now at the same time, but let's say our lower level consultants are the ones that really need some help. Especially when you have in staffing, you have this seat of the production manager, which makes things very challenging. It's a hard role. I give them credit. And so I was like, how can I alleviate a lot of that stress by providing certain trainings and identifying learning opportunities that would then, again, make sure that our managers, who are usually the top producers, can still do what they need to do to drive revenue, bring jobs, feed the team, but also still be a leader to them teams. But I then help kind of carry that burden of upskilling and managing them a little bit. So we put together this program called a CDP, Client Development Plan, where we really dive in on a weekly basis with our consultants to explore what it's like. It's almost like it's coaching for sure, where we explore the thought process, what they're trying to do. We practice word tracks, we do all these things. It's a little manual, but at the same time, it gives this personal touch that that I think people appreciate, and we've seen so much traction in a short period of time by launching this and running it. And we're starting a new program in Europe soon, where we're kind of pivoting a little bit to test, like beta test some new ideas that we have. So we're kind of putting US versus Europe, which is going to be a lot of fun. But yeah, that one for sure. That program itself has been really eye-opening and really, really powerful.
Awesome. Nice. I love it. And honestly, I'm going off topic here so in so many ways, but I love it because I can ask so many questions because it's such an interesting area I don't get to speak about very often. What have you seen as maybe key differences, at least from your perspective, when dealing with US consultants or US staff versus European staff? You see many differences in how they approach this sort of thing and their receptiveness to it? More kind of a question around the cultural differences, I suppose, across the organization.
Sure. And it's a good question. You guys are funnier. I like the humor of my Europe team
Far
better.
more sarcastic and dry.
Oh, it's so sarcastic and dry, and I love it. But there's not crazy differences. There's a little bit around like GDPR for sure that then comes into play, especially in our world.
Mm.
But you know, there's only a few caveats, but it's not much to make a drastic difference outside of just how the thing I would say I noticed is that the leaders are a little bit different over there than the leaders over here. And I don't know if that's like from the co-founders and how they drive stuff, but, and I don't know if that's part of the culture, but they do things well in areas that we do things bad, and we do things well in areas that they do things good. So now, they haven't done this before, but now I'm trying to bridge that, close the pond, and really bring us closer so that we have a really good foundation on how we're operating. And then there's more collaboration, because right now they barely talk to each other. There's some clients we share and pass and work with on each, but it's not as much as I want. Technology makes the world much smaller, and we should be collaborating heavily with them.
Completely agree. As long as it doesn't go over the top with too much tech, and we'll see what AI does
Yeah.
to that in the future. Hey, I'm sure we'll talk about that a bit later. And the second topic you mentioned was around this embracing of metrics and not viewing them as like a negative thing, as a stick almost, again, to draw back to the name of this podcast, right? And you mentioned it a little bit earlier on talking about L&D, about metrics, about data and all that kind of good stuff. What's your take on metrics and data then, and how you use them?
The way I like to describe it is there's cycles, right? Your sales cycle. I break it down into two, depending on what you're really focusing on, your recruitment cycle and your sales cycle. There's proper steps that are pretty standard across the board, right? Now, if you attach metrics to those steps, you can start to get a clear idea of where people are starting to hit some walls, going from, let's say, fruition to close, or like source to close, or prospect to close. And I've seen too many times where managers like get on people when they don't make enough phone calls or they don't have enough phone time. There's like, what are you doing? Right? This is very unique. They always talk about like the what, like you need to do more, you need to do this, you need to do this. But they never talk about the how, right? And where I come in is I'm like, all right, you got your kind of, you expressed yourself. Thank you. Let me take it from here. This is how you're going to do what he's trying to tell you to do, right? Because honestly, you have people who are prideful, who think they can do it. They're A-type personalities in the sales organizations, right? So they rarely ask for help, which is, don't get me wrong, that's an issue that I have to deal with on my own. but this can be a very clear identifier that allows them to say, oh, wait, I didn't hit that, but why? And how can I make it the improvement, right? So I'm trying to do a big shift on, don't use it to crack the whip. Use it to feed the carrot, right? And use it to identify, like, here's where it's weak, and this is probably why. So now we've identified that in the cycle. Let's hone in and develop something around that, right? So if it's certain word tracks, maybe it's a little bit more practice. Maybe you need to try some different techniques. Maybe you need to try different ways to approach the situation. Maybe you need to push some more. Maybe you can be a little bit more relaxed, right? But it's very situational, and it's very unique. But it really should help us be, a guiding canary in like a tunnel, right? It should never be a whip.
Yeah. I mean, we speak about this a lot when we're speaking to our customers. What kind of targets should we set? How should we be using those throughout the OneUp platform, for example? And one key thing I've always stressed, and one thing I love about Chef, I want to say it was a company called Venture Construction that I spoke to very early on, like an old client of ours now, many years ago. And they showed us a presentation that they use when talking their new staff through how to, think about targets. And their whole thing was like, if you're getting the revenue and the placements, we don't care how many calls you're making, the CVs, the interviews. If you're doing the numbers, we're not going to look at it. If those are short, we're going to look at your CVs and interviews. If those are short, we're going to look at your inputs. And they kind of trace things all the way back to really stress, look, we don't care about the number of phone calls as long as you're getting the outputs. But if you aren't getting the outputs, we're going to ask about the inputs, right? And then, like you say, it's not just about numbers for the sake of numbers. Someone can do twice as many calls a day as what their target is. If they're still not getting the outputs in terms of CVs and interviews, there's a problem at that first step, right? So it all comes back to these metrics that you're speaking about.
Correct. Yeah, and I used to hate when people said that. As long as you're billing, I don't care. Because like some of my worst people with metrics, they'd have like zeros, they'd have crap, but they'd be $500,000 producers or more. And I'm just like, you're not helping me help the people who need this. You're not providing a really good example here.
Yeah. It is hard because people then turn around and go, yeah, well, he doesn't make any phone calls and he's billing this much. Why can't I do the same? And it's like, yeah, well, he's billing $500,000. Therefore, he can get away with not doing it, right?
Yeah, and he's been doing it for 15 years. You've been doing this for 6 months. Like, you got to listen to me, not him, in a different way. But that actually is a unique topic. And I think that as it pertains to it, like, especially around those top producers that think, okay, I know my process, all these things, like, you have to be able to then collaborate and align with the leaders to make sure that the message is driven. And even, like, for example, I've turned $500,000 producers into $1 million producers based on getting them a little more organized, using the data. Like, they had the will push to that number. It was chaotic, but they pushed through it. It was insane. After we kind of pulled back and looked at the engine and what they were trying to do, and then started to identify the different pieces within that, we're able to then, like, really streamline it and then maximize it, right? So again, it's the traditional work smarter, not harder.
For sure. And imagine those for smaller companies then, that again, maybe aren't fully up to scratch on their data, on their metrics. Where do you recommend they get started? If someone said, right, I really want to sit down, I want to get on top of my numbers, I want to be able to do not L&D to the level that Spencer could do because he's an expert, but I want to start doing something like that in my company, where would you recommend they begin?
I mean, I think leaders should really take. I used to love saying, sometimes you got to take a step back to sprint 3 steps forward, right? CEOs don't like that, but it's true
Because we
though.
want it
It's
now.
like
We want to move forward now, today. Let's
exactly.
go.
We got to do it now. We got to do it now, and it's a very
Yeah.
reactive mindset. Um, so, I think it's just like, hey, like, let's breathe. Let's look at what's working well. Let's start identifying the problems. I do surveys. I do one-on-ones. I do observations. I do shadow. I'll just sit there in a corner and watch, right? Because when you're on your desk and everyone's on their desk, they're even though they could be right next to each other, they're in their own little world, right? So I really try to get granular with what is the steps in the process, and that helps me design new workflows for our CRM. That helps me identify where someone might be getting caught up. I think analysis paralysis is like a huge thing in our world, and like, how do we find these things and how can we make it better? So it's really about honing in and taking the time, like, just still. Like, just take a second, just breathe. It's not going to hurt you. You're not going to die, right? I mean, it depends, but if you just take a breath and you start to pay attention, do some stuff, ask your people. One of the things I really like to think about is once a company gets to a certain head count, a certain size, it's no longer about the CEO who created it. It's about the community and the environment that has been created within, right? So how now do you guide that, right? So it's more about shepherding your people to the, like, staying on the path that you envisioned, but also allowing some flexibility and change. If you're too rigid when you do those things, you're gonna get resistance, and that just slows down any objective you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I think every company asks themselves that question at some point. At what point do we lose control of the culture, right? When does it take on a life of its own, and
Right.
certain ways of working and ways of thinking are then embedded that you can't easily change, right? Do you have an idea,
Yeah.
at least in your mind, of what sort of number that happens at?
Um, I think anything about once, like, your core team starts having team and you have that, like, CEO to leaders to subordinates, I think that's when trend goes off. So whatever that number may be, as long as there's, like, layers to how the communication is driven, that's when you really need to do it. Because again, the person who's built the company, has been running it and has developed those leaders, they've developed some skill sets, but they're not identical clones. They're still going to bring their own flavor, personality, and then depending on how busy the leader is, he might be too removed at that one point where they start developing their own voice, and now it's getting pushed down. And then, let alone the fact that then that bottom line is constantly communicating and developing its own culture, right? So, I think once you start getting layers to, like, leadership and management, that's when you really need to start paying attention to how things are delivered and what you're really trying to achieve.
So, I mean, we see it, right? We're a 40-person company. I've got me, a leadership team of five underneath me. They've all got their own teams underneath that as well. And we're very aware that there are different cultures that exist in each of those teams. And we try to have a number of things that carry across all of them, but no doubt they do still have their own unique cultures as well, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. And it's not about, like, suffocating it too. It's about, again, I like to look at it as like the little bowling alley buffers. You don't want to totally crush it, but you still want to guide them to a path and just let there be some breathing room, with some, controls, but just to allow that to develop and understand, because what you learn from observation can then really change what decisions you're going to decide on when it comes to you really pushing something else down the pipe, right?
Yeah.
And you shouldn't do it in a vacuum. And that's my big passing on, like I really believe in like that culture, that community aspect and listening.
Mm,
Again, you have to kind of filter, right? You're going to have very far right, very far left, centralist type personalities around the culture of your organization. Um, and you really want to try to find the balance, right? And it starts from talent acquisition to L&D to leaders to C-suite and everyone really driving and believing in that message.
love it. This did actually prompt a question that I was thinking about earlier on, but kind of saved for a little bit later down the line. There has to be a level, I imagine, where as a manager of a recruitment, like a team of recruitment consultants, a billing manager, whatever it might be, where L&D, you kind of have a line where it kind of gets drawn. It's like, how far in do you guys step? Is it purely reactive when a manager raises their hand and says, hey, this person needs help here? Or are you kind of raising your hand and saying, hey, we've seen in the data, this person needs a hand with whatever it might be? To what level are you reactive and what level are you proactive as an L&D team?
Good question. It depends on the leaders I'm working with. Again, I have different personalities. Ideal world, we would be able to manage things through the leaders. They're not direct reports of us, but we collaborate heavily to understand what's going on because if they're sitting on desk with people and they're kind of hearing things, observing things, and really want to call something out, they're going to be more well positioned than I would be, just hovering over the entire sales floor. So no, it's interesting. Sometimes I don't get communicators and sometimes I do, right? So one of the big messages I try to drive is use us, leverage us, right? We are here to provide that support. And it's been working. Specifically with one of the things like I talked about what I was proud of, the CDP, we've taken on, it's almost like a manager responsibility, but it was a burden that was causing just delays and too much, right? It was always like oh, we have to do these one-on-one things, right? And it was always just kind of, they had some like techniques that they would use to drive certain activities. But we went in and, like I said, observed, watched. I sat in on one-on-ones. I sat on like quarterly meetings. I sat on like an annual review just to see like how that communication would take place. From
Mm,
there, I used that information to then develop something that would drive things not only positively, but with what I like to call define next steps. Like always kind of pushing, but never really reprimanding except around accountability. Every time they come into the meeting with me around that, not only we set action items and points and we make sure they agree to those points. We make sure that they feel like they're coming up with the ideas of those points so that really gets buy-in. But then we hold them to that. I had to kick people out of my little CDP program because I'm like, you are not taking it seriously, right? You're not really leaning into this. And there's other
mm,
people who want this action. And this will probably come back with our change management talk a little bit later. But it's, I think what the L&D person should do, or someone in this kind of position where you're kind of managing the newbies, the new onboards, as well as, straddling with the leaders, is over communication as much as you can, right? Drive them, push them, ask them how they like to be talked to, right? What kind of avenue should I be delivering messages and what do you want to see, right? From there, I'd be able to develop something that would cater to the majority. We get buy-in and then we hold people accountable to it. But it's been a process. It's not a short,
mm.
quick flick of a switch when it comes to these things, especially when you go from very small to like exploding.
I like it in the way that you framed it as a like you're looking at some people and saying, look, you're not engaged with this properly, therefore we're going to kind of put you to one side of this, because then it doesn't become I'm being forced to do this whether I like it or not. It's
Yeah,
actually kind of a wait, this can help me and I'm now being excluded. Uh, It kind of drives that want for it,
exactly.
right? Which I guess is really interesting.
Exactly. We took FOMO into consideration with this. We decided that, okay, if I went to my leaders and was like, hey, we're going to put you in a program, we're going to talk about the clients, what you're prospecting, how you're going to do it, what word tracks, they're going to be like, oh, you're an L&D guy. What do you know besides the 10 years of experience in staffing I have? Um, so, but they still have a little bit of like, you know, I'm the leader. I know what to do. Right.
A bit of
Which is okay.
apprehension
And
about getting help
yeah,
from outside. Yeah.
exactly. Like I'm good. I'm a top biller. I don't need that. And it's just like, first step is acknowledge it's okay. It's not a big deal. Like let's lean into this and see what we can do. Again, let's turn your numbers. Let's double it. Let's triple it. Let's really see where we can take you. Right. So there was a little pushback on like getting managers in those things. So what we started was, all right, we're going down to first level. Um, Very quickly we started seeing results. And because their people started seeing results and then talking about those to their leaders, Next thing I know, I had leaders knocking on my door saying, can I get a scheduled time, please? And I was like, all right, this is it.
And now we're cooking. They're coming to me.
Yeah, exactly. So again, it's a trial and error thing. Like the one thing I really like about this, especially with the organization I'm in and with any organization I'm ever going to be in, you need to be part of a team that understands that failure is not a bad thing. Trial and error is amazing. It is a learning opportunity. It's exciting. If something breaks, be excited to fix it, right? But learn from that and make it better, right? This is where I get this a lot from my IT friends, right? Because like going through writing code, doing all the things, you have to break things down and build it back up or try to identify different things. On a sales floor where, it's very hectic, it seems that like people put a little bit too much negativity on that. You could have done better there, man. Do better next time. Doesn't help. Like really lean into it and identify, all right, what happened? What were you feeling during that call? Like, what did you think? Like, what really kind of triggered you? Why did you resist? Why did you hold back? Like, just dive in a little bit deeper. And through those conversations, you can really help advance people.
Love that as well. And in the previous answer, you said something that relates to this perfectly fair. So we can go on towards the whole change management piece, right?
Yeah.
And I joked to you earlier that there's a lot I can learn from this because we're going through that stage of growth as a business now where rolling things out to 40 people ain't so easy anymore. So my notepad's at the ready. I'm ready to listen here. Change management. Talk to me about it.
So it is complex. It really depends on how ingrained the culture is, or I say bad habits, but again, I don't like to use it because it seems negative, right? Not ideal habits, right? I've even had people in rooms come to me and say, I hate change. And it's like, all right, well, at least you're honest.
No one likes change because it's uncomfortable, right? It's different. It's new. It's, I've got to learn new things or change how I do things that I'm used to doing, no?
Yeah. You're right. And a lot of people do like hate that at first, but you grow so much more when you're in the uncomfort zone than you are in the comfort zone. When you push yourself outside of the area, survival mode comes in, right? You have to have this fight or flight reactivity to you. You have to be able to pivot. And that only comes from true understanding of what you're doing to then push yourself outside of the scope of what you've been doing to really make those improvements. And the scarier part is not only stepping out of it, turning around and looking at it, right? And saying, okay, that's where I was doing things really badly. That's where I should make an investment of time in making these improvements, right? Let me go then talk to these people about how they do those things. Let me go find that out, right? As in L&D, I do that and develop programming around it, right? As I start to identify like majority problems across different teams that usually don't talk to each other but still have the same issues, now I can start to build programming or courses or learning journeys that really then cater to that issue, right? And as you work to develop those things, it has to be in baby steps. Change management cannot happen in one fell swoop. You need to find one or two main topics that drive something, that get buy-in, and with that and consistent communication, consistent messaging, consistent pushes, I think that's where you can start to make the difference. Timeline, it can be a huge variable depending on like how you go about it and what kind of buy-in you're getting from the top to the bottom.
Love it. Is there like a framework or a process that you follow when it comes to change management where you sit down during the planning phase and go, right, we're kind of following this model. Some parts we'll use, some parts we won't, or follow the whole thing through to completion? How do you approach it?
I do try to develop something that we stick to, because if you stick to an initial plan, then it's easier to identify where hiccup might have happened or where something might have been a misstep, right? And if you start to identify that, then you can work backwards, right? Or you can break it back down and to the point where everything was good up to this point. So I do like to have a very set path of what we were trying to do with like not only let's say consistent meetings, but also consistent questioning or probing around, all right, how's it going? What's happening in here? Different checkpoints throughout the process to ensure, again, buffering through to the end of that journey. And then taking some time to then evaluate what people liked or what they didn't like, and then doing it again. Rinse and repeat.
Got it. So I'm aware you may not be able to go into full detail here, but can you think of a recent example where you've had to roll something relatively, it could be the CDP thing you mentioned, something quite notable out, and what sort of process you followed for that? I'm just thinking for those here listening and thinking, cool, so what does an actual process look like? What did you do?
Yeah. Let me see. The CDP is a good one, but I think if we'll use something a little bit more specific to us. Let's say reference and something. Reference calls are a huge factor that a lot of people kind of sit on. And I always preach, I mean, I made best clients I ever had were from a reference call, right? And like the most revenue ever generated was because of that group of people that I was referencing and then built relationships with. So we were struggling to get people to lean into this because again, a lot of people don't want to give you contact information of people they don't want them to be bothered. They don't want to go through that in the very early stages of working with a headhunter. But we can provide a lot more value when we do that. We can actually learn more about the candidates when we collaborate them. But there was a lot of resistance around this. So what we started doing is not only do we tie in an incentive on a monthly basis with weekly kind of trackers and leaderboards, but we really pushed on also the workflow, the process in our CRM. So workflow, process, CRM, incentive, and then communication. Through that on a weekly basis, on key leaderboards, as well as an overall incentive that everyone's excited to do, we're able to then drive that. And now we're seeing much bigger improvements in our consultants' abilities to not only get the reference information, but conduct those references as well.
I love that. It's a really good example as well. Was this something that you identified as a problem, or something that the MD turned around and said to you, "Hey, this is something that we've identified at a top level we want to address now"? So you kind of had that executive buy-in. How did it come about as a project?
It was definitely something that I say I saw. There's a few other external trainers too that would, I feel like, yell into the ether about it, but we never really saw any results. So I started just to really hone in on that. And not only did I identify issues within the CRM around the complexities of actually putting in the data, but then listening to people, kind of just jumping on a call or two, shadowing. I was like, man, they're really struggling here. Their confidence is not as powerful as when they're talking about these topics as when they're trying to push on these things. So let's hone in on that, right? So that's when we kind of pushed and saw like, man, these guys really are missing. They're leaving a lot of money on the table by not doing these things.
Yeah, I can think of the number of times that I've come off a sales call or something, and someone, I'll say it's not for me now, but thank you. They'll go, "Oh, can you think of anyone else that would be useful for them to see X, Y, and Z?" And I'm just like, not really, but I'll let you know. And that's as far as it goes. You never hear it again, right? So it is trying to reinforce and ask for references in a good way. And I guess the blessing is because your role spans across L&D and across sales ops, you get that workflow and process side inside of the CRM. So it's all well and good. The communication side, I completely understand. The L&D side, that's your job, is to get that out there so they know what to do. I'm curious about the incentivization layer. Do you guys own the way you design commission structures and that, for example, at Discover, or is that sitting with someone else and you had to collaborate with them?
So the compensation stuff is set, right? But we do have a budget to play with, right? So for example, we had we are in Miami, so we did a boat day.
Of course you
And
did.
so, of course, I mean,
what else are you going to do in Miami, huh?
it was a beautiful day. So we use like different activities, engaging things, kind of getting them out of office because again, I'm a big believer in you got to kind of put your head to the table and grind out your first couple months to a year in our industry, and really hit it because especially depending on where you're coming from, the network aspect of it and the relationship aspect of it takes time. So we really try to drive a lot of that within the word tracks and things we teach. But as well as we have a budget to, let's say, play with stuff. I saw this rock climbing gym. Maybe we'll go paddleboarding. Maybe we'll go to the movies. Maybe we'll do like mini putt. But we'll have an additional kind of incentive. Say, not only will you get paid more if you do these things, and you're going to get a nice commission check, but we're going to give you a little fun activity as well.
Love it. So you get that kind of full layer that comes through. When it comes to communication, the line that you often hear is you've got to repeat yourself 7 times before anyone hears you as like a business leader, right? I imagine it gets even harder when you aren't carrying that CEO badge when you're saying something. How many times do you find yourself reinforcing or retraining on certain topics so that it actually sticks and really becomes part of a daily workflow?
I'd say it's a lot. It is hard, right? I think it's 90 days to build a habit or 60 days to build a habit or something like that. So it's not just about like preaching or being in a classroom and me, yelling at people or talking out loud. It's are we touching on the key learning styles, your auditory, visual, your kinetic, right? How are we making sure that they're testing things, touching, feeling, and especially with the types of personalities or profiles that we get who sit in the chair as a staffing person, to then exploring it, tracking it, and using it to motivate and continue to help them grow. But it is quite repetitive. Even when I got my L&D manager underneath me, he was like, why do I have to keep repeating myself? I'm like, come on, man. Like, you just have to make sure you're patient with the process. And you have to be even keel, right? He was
Yeah.
very composed, but at the same time, he was venting to me. And it's true. Like, we have different personalities. I brought him on my team for the way that he looks at things is very similar to mine. It's very methodical. It's very process oriented, right? But your salesperson is a little bit more chaotic, right? They're very go get it. They're very on the reactive side. We try to be as much on the proactive side and have that over communication, right? So having to repeat ourselves is just the name of the game here, but it's just about how you define those early on, knowing that you have to repeat yourself and then building steps to catch it and follow up on it so that you're not like, let's say, annoyed that someone doesn't remember something, is I think the better step. You have to make sure you kind of envision it, like really try to design it and walk through the path first, and then use that to help kind of keep it sane.
Love it. I got a question actually, because I haven't really ever spoken to anyone in recruitment about this. How much do you document stuff? So write up documentation that people can use.
So when you say people can use, what do you mean?
So like so you heard about like tools like Notion, for example, right? You can write internal documentation that people can go into any time, like a knowledge base internally, I guess. And if they said, oh,
Yeah.
I did have training for this, but I forgot those last little few bits they mentioned. I want to go and read back up on this again. Have you got training videos that you've done? Is it documents you've written up? How are you providing a knowledge base for your team to be able to leverage?
Yeah. So that comes in a lot of like the initial onboarding training and upskilling we do. We definitely noticed, especially when I got into Discover, first thing I noticed was a really heavy underutilization of the CRM. Now, the CRM I usually say is like the spine of the business. We wouldn't be walking, we wouldn't be running, we wouldn't be making revenue if we didn't have this spine, right? And then you have your teams, and you have other teams that are collaborating who are also trying to do it. So what we try to drive is making sure that you do document a lot, right? Administrative work for this has always been a little bit of a challenge, but we've been making those slow incremental changes that get them to not only document, but now see the value in putting things on the system or being detailed, right? Because if everyone's chasing, let's say Johnson & Johnson, right? Everyone's chasing the same manager and then no one's putting information, that eventually that person on that side can be like, what's wrong with this company, right? Like I'm getting 50 calls a day from these sales guys who are trying to sell me people. Do they know that I'm talking to Mike at their organization? Like, what is happening? And that's going to hurt whoever else is doing it. So a lot of what I try to drive is like making sure that there's visibility without verbal communication, right? We should be able to know exactly what everyone's doing without having to totally chase people down, because that's a slower process. Right? I've had to go and talk to everybody on the team to find out who I can't talk to. It's going to be much more convoluted. But if I can, let's say I'm facing these companies, let me see what's happening. That's where we push that value.
Makes a lot of sense. I get it. Cool. Nice. So 3 really interesting topics there. I mentioned to you earlier on, we'd have a really good thing to start closing up on. I want your favorite story and a horror story over the last 10 years. It can be a favorite story about yourself and a horror story about yourself. It can be about someone you've worked with. It tends to be we get the better stories when it's about someone else, but I'll let you pick.
Funny one was, let's see. Okay. So the thing that happened to me most, like, and this would kind of hook me on recruitment. I tell this story often in early stages when I'm onboarding people. I really believe in this industry. Like, I'm very passionate about the value that it can bring. And that usually comes out like when I work with my candidates, they're like, I've never worked with a recruiter like this. I've never talked to you like you really kind of push and help and kind of see it. You really take a consultative approach. But I remember my very first placement I did, and it was this, like, she had this lower level bookkeeping job, was being very poorly paid. I got her like a 20K increase because she was just like doing everything in there with a nice notable company. She has like a single mom, and she could like afford like daycare. Now it was like such a punch in the feels, like really got me. And that was like that moment where I was just like, wow, this is really cool. I can actually impact someone's life. And I'm helping them kind of make these decisions. And it was really, really powerful, really kind of got me hooked. And then I got a really nice commission check, and I was like, wow, not only can I help people, but I can actually make a nice bit of money.
While helping
So
people. Wow, what a win-win.
while people. So it seems like a little awkward, but at the same time, I'm very comfortable talking about that. We do make an impact in people's lives. We do work to like really provide a lot of value. And yeah, we get decent pay for it because it is complex. If you think about like options trading, you're trading objects that don't talk. They don't like change their minds. They don't show up to an interview smelling like weed, right? Like I'm dealing with a
Yeah.
very complex process, right? And it is very challenging trying to navigate that and help people come to certain agreements, right? So it is super rewarding, and it can really change your life. And that for me has been, was an eye-opening then and kind of kept me in it for the last 10 years.
I love it. And it's a good story to inspire those coming in, right? Because I think most people ask about how did you get into recruitment? And pretty much everyone says, without fail, I fell into it. No one kind of went to college or came out of school saying, I'm going to be a recruiter one day. And I think many get drawn in by the money. But where I've seen the really good, as you say, recruiters really start to develop and evolve is those that then see, actually, I'm having a real impact, not just on the candidate's life as well, getting them into a better paying job, something they love doing more, but it's also the companies they're working with and seeing them go from success to success as well. There's a lot that you can appreciate, though it does, like you say, come with that complexity of you aren't selling a product. You've got a candidate, you've got a client, they're people. People by nature are unpredictable, so it can make things a little bit messy sometimes, right?
Oh, absolutely. If we had more time, I could spend a couple of hours and a few beers on some of the hilarious horror stories we've had of candidates doing crazy things, their clients doing crazy things. It's a fun place.
I can imagine. Well, when I get over to Miami sometime again, we'll have to do that 100%. What about horror story? Can you think of anything where you've just gone, oh my God, I never want to think about that moment again, but I'm going to make you think about it now?
Horror story. I mean, the thing that's coming to mind was my last organization when COVID hit, because it was I'm still friends with the CEO. I really have a lot of respect for him. We have a few different opinions on how things should be run, which is okay, right?
That's human nature, yeah.
Yeah, and so, but I was ultimately very amazing guy. I really looked up to him. But when COVID hit, he really wasn't sure what to do, right? Because I'm a little bit more of a digital native. I embrace a lot of change. I like to be outside my comfort zone and take the time to make those improvements, right? But when you have these kind of, let's say, I'm good, this is really good, we don't need anything. COVID threw a lot of people for a whirlwind. And I was coming off of like a few different training things and things that I've done on the side, where I was like, I got this, right? But having to go through the layoff, that we didn't do much, but we had to do it, and kind of like the hecticness, the constant meetings and everything else, phenomenal learning experience. But I mean, every day was very scary, especially when, like I said earlier in the conversation, L&D sometimes is seen or looked at as a nice to have, and in chaotic moments, that's the let go department. And I was able to kind of hide the fear and say, this is why we need this right now. And they leaned into it, and that's when we had the best year, right? But through that process, I wouldn't want to do it again, but I'm glad I did it. And it really like showed a lot, and we were able to really achieve a lot. But it was scary. It was really scary.
Yeah. We've hired like 3 leaders into the business over the last year in sales, marketing, and product. And as we've gone through the interview process, one of the questions I love asking is, what's the hardest thing you've ever had to do at work? And pretty much all of them, bar none, said something related to COVID, and either whether it was making redundancies or furloughing people, or they were scared and not sure what's coming next. And I think we all look back at that time, and there's still a lot of people that are just like, whoa, that was a thing that happened to the world 4 years ago, right? It's crazy.
Yeah. I think it was a little bit of a blessing in disguise, as weird as it might be to say that. It kind of pushed people beyond their boundaries, which I think was a really good learning opportunity for a lot. There's a little bit of a recoil going on now, but I think ultimately it changed the future of work and the landscape of how things are done for the better, and also inspired that curiosity and kind of bringing it full circle. That ABC, always be curious. Don't get complacent. Don't get stagnant, right? Keep yourself on the edge. Keep looking forward and kind of making sure that you're always willing to jump. and attack whatever's in front of you when it comes.
Love that. Nice little way to kind of end up that part as well. So, a few quick fire questions for you. Number one, who is, and I hate using the term sometimes, who's your favorite LinkedIn influencer? Who do you look to for content or some things you can learn from?
I've been digging Sal Khan lately, from Khan Academy. I think a lot of like his, if you watch any of his videos or his talks, it always is good. Simon Sinek is always gold. I'm sure you hit that a lot. But the power of why, I mean, I really try to drive that out to, I think true leaders need to be able to express themselves on the how of things, not the what. The why encompasses it all. Those two right now is kind of my recent pick.
Like it. What about favorite podcast or book? Because not everyone listens to podcasts, I've been told a few times.
I'm an odd one with that. I just started listening to Hard Fork through the New York Times. Very interesting. They talk about interesting stuff. It's engaging. It's very easy to digest. When you're on, let's say, a bike ride or something like that, it's a good one. Very focused on a lot of strategy and business. So really, really like that one right now. That's what I'm vibing to.
Nice. And then last question I'll ask you, if there's a tip that you could give to, say, a 50-person organization that's going through that next stage of growth and the MD's like, I want some of your advice, what's the one piece of advice you would give to them?
That are ready. You got to slow down to speed up. Take a step back, reflect on what you've done, acknowledge the good, embrace the bad, and lean into the improvement.
Love it. Nice one. And then this is a bonus question that I can only really ask you. Are all those wine bottles behind you full or empty?
When you come to Miami, you'll find out. They're full.
Love it. Awesome. Spencer, that has been great fun. Thank you so much for your time, mate. Really appreciate it and look forward to this one coming out.
Appreciate it. Thanks, man.